All right. Well, welcome back, Mandana and Francisca, Ayesha and Femke and Martha. I'm looking forward to this discussion. I think it's a really important topic to make progress on this. And I'll just put it in context for a moment and say, we've been doing a lot of, we've had 2 sessions already on computational design, and the daylighting community has been wrestling with climate-based daylight models for the last 2 decades. And I would say that the science is in part, the scientific advancements, and therefore the narrative in our community is in part dictated by the technology of our research methods, right? So climate-based daylight modeling has dictated to some extent the way policies, codes, and standards have guided, provided guidance for designers, and it's become a part of our narrative, right? About how we're designing for better daylighting in buildings. And I think there's a similar trajectory, perhaps, or a relationship correlation that we can think about with the methods that we're using for studying our connection to outdoors, in particular, view and view quality. And several of you talked about human factors methods in a wide range of settings, from physical settings and then virtual settings, and in between, where we were looking at pictures or we were looking at completely immersive environments. And I would love to hear from you all about some of the biases, perhaps, that our methods, because of the technologies that are available, our methods that are available, the biases that those cause, and we might need to watch out for, and then also what those methods and technologies will really afford as benefits to progress the field. So in no particular order, if you all would like to try to answer that or respond to that, it would be wonderful.
I'll go ahead.
Sure.
I think you're right, Kevin, in pointing out that the methods used in any research will sort of steer the way towards research in the future. In particular, I should mention that, for example, eye tracking measures are very commonly used in other fields, especially psychology, and they're pretty established. And in my research, what I have attempted to do is to bring the knowledge that is out there and to sort of contextualize it in the realm of window view preference, whereas some findings of this nature are already existing in, for example, commercial studies for product designs, as well as looking at urban spaces as well. But as you said, some of these methods are nascent, and their applications and their applications, actually the wider application of these methods will help us realize the potential biases as we go along, as you mentioned. And as a future step, I would like to see how, for example, the same eye tracking measures would shift if we were using a real window. Although, as with any experimental protocol, the idea is to limit or control some of the variables that we cannot account for in real environments. So I think that I would acknowledge that shortcoming for an experimental protocol. Yeah.
Thank you. Mandana?
Yeah, well, the biases that I can think of in an experimental setting, maybe those are the biases that we should be very careful about. But considering that the science in general moves a bit slower than what happens in the practice, I don't think there's anything to worry about, and we should try to exploit more sophisticated measurements if we can, in order to understand better what actually we need as humans, and we should leave out the assumptions. And I think that has been my purpose in my research as well, when I resorted to eye tracking, well, it was not to resort to eye tracking, it was mainly to understand what is happening what are we seeing, or what is happening from the point of view of the subject, and rather than just asking them and adding a layer to that. So I think there shouldn't be worries. Of course, it was new when I started, at least, using this method in our field, and now incorporating it in the VR and trying to see all of these technologies together and how we can use of it, it's new and it's slow. Maybe career-wise, it's not the best choice to go for something that is a little bit slow in that sense. But I think what we should really focus on, because we need to know what is the people's need, what are their actual responses.
Yeah. Femke, do you want to chime in?
Yes, thank you. I pretty much agree with Mandana, and would say that we haven't reached the borders of potentials of technology yet. And I think especially in terms of ambulatory sensing and combining data from these sensors is something that we need to progress the field, and is also going to help us to answer a number of questions that we have right now. For instance, we can now unobtrusively measure people's gaze behavior, or the temperatures that they're exposed to, or the daylight that they're exposed to. And I think that we need to dive into these technological advancements a little bit more to overcome some of the biases that we have, but also to have a more holistic view on what Windows can mean for us. I think we need to exploit that a little bit further. So instead of walking into the boundaries of existing technology, of methodologies, I think there's a world out there that we need to exploit.
Yeah, thank you. Francisca, I'm going to come to you, but I'm going to let you respond to two questions at once, if you'd like, because I want to transition to another topic. So. I've been reading Lisa Heschong's new book, Visual Delight in Architecture, and one of the things that I've been thinking about while reading it and listening to all of your presentations, and in particular yours, Francisca, was the radical interdisciplinarity of this field and how challenging it is to sort of integrate these diverse knowledge spheres from social sciences and psychology to physiology. And then, of course, we're designers and architects and lighting designers. So that's a lot to integrate. I'm curious if you've found yourself wrestling with the edges of your individual disciplinary knowledge and looking for collaborations. And I thought maybe you would like to start with that response, Francisca.
Thank you, Kevin. I think all the things are merged together very nicely, as you mentioned. So I think for the bias has also to do with the interdisciplinarity aspects of it. So from one side, as Ayesha nailed it when she said that we are seeing all these tendencies of using new technologies, which is great. We have all these available, VR, AR, gaze, machine learning. So we have a lot of things going on there. But even something that has stricken me is that we still analyze views in ways that were used very earlier on. So it seems that the instruments that we are using, perhaps not the objective instruments, but yes, the self-reported instruments, the way that we are using them now, they were designed for different modes of presentation. So for people observing scenes in a paper, printed images, or perhaps observing their view. So there is necessarily this interdisciplinary work that you're mentioning to control this bias, but also I think it's we need to make sure that we are reporting all these things. I think one way to counteract these biases is by trying to report as much as possible the way we're trying to analyze these things. And by that I mean we need to collaborate more and not just use the technologies, but also try and understand new ways, not only follow one development path, which could be the technology, but also the human factor. So how these have been developed, and it's a lot of information.
Yes.
But
Thank you. And
Thank
Martha,
you.
I know that we were discussing sort of what we measure, and I wonder if you would like to.
Right. No, I think it's really fascinating, and linking the other sessions, there was one on the pandemic and the effects, and Femke, you spoke about office, and now Francisca, you talked about communicating. The question I have is, when we look at offices of the future, from the business perspective or from the perspective of industry, they often talk about productivity. On the other hand, if we're going to include them in this interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary approach, I didn't hear that word yesterday, and I haven't heard it today either. I heard performance and job engagement. So I guess my question is sort of, do you see a relationship beyond architects, beyond scientists, beyond your research groups, to reaching out to potential clients and explaining the importance to them? And how do you deal with something when they're talking about productivity in workers and you're talking about wellness or performance or engagement? How do you get there? Mandana, you're nodding your head, so why don't you take the answer as a start?
Yeah, well, I will try. It's a difficult question, like how to reach out as a researcher, and especially if you're at the beginning of your work, it's also even more difficult to reach out to the clients, as you're mentioning, and highlight the importance of these issues. So the one way that we are doing, one of the ways at least that we are doing, and we're going to have a session about it, is the daylight and education. By educating my students, I try to present their work, and I think by educating them on different aspects and by engaging them really into the process of measurement and understanding what is behind the calculations, what is behind the simulations that they are working with, what is behind these measurements and what do they mean, and calibrate them. I think this is, again, maybe a little bit slow, but one way of really reaching out to them and to the later clients, so to say.
Mm-hmm. And we have to jump in. There's two more questions that have come in just now, and we want to try to squeeze them in. So one is from Mike Kenton, is asking about the amount of nature or sky within a view, and whether there's a certain point, like 50% of the view content is nature or sky, and above which it saturates. Femke, would you like to take that?
Yeah, to my knowledge, there have been no studies that actually look at quantities, but we do see that sky is important. Is an important element to have in the view, but there are only just a handful of studies that actually look at the view, that acknowledge that the sky, that acknowledge that the sky is also an important part of the view content. So this is one of the areas of research that really requires more research. There are studies that say that there need to be at least 3 layers, so the ground layer, the middle layer, and the sky. But how much sky there needs to be, that is unclear.
Yes, thank you. And I know we have to wrap up, so I will just answer very briefly the last question, which was about, what about artificial windows? And is there a future in artificial windows? And I'll just take the floor and say, I don't think so, and I hope not. So with that, we have to wrap up this session. Very excited to see the progress that we're making in this important field. And I think it's been a somewhat forgotten topic, so I'm so glad that we're making meaningful progress now. And Martha, can you help me remember, what do we have next?
Our next session will start at 12:30
with light and health, yes?
Light and health.
Excellent.
Again.
Very good. So we'll see you back very shortly. Well, in a few moments for light and health.